conversation. So please feel free to ask questions that you have. Again, we're here to really answer questions that you have. So we wanted to start really just doing kind of an overview, and Renee, I'm going to ask if you can put the first slide up that talks about what the solidarity economy is. Those of you who are tuning in may be wondering. And so we have just put together a few points of information to go over mutual aid and the solidarity economy. And so mutual aid is a phrase that you might have heard a lot over the last few weeks. It is when people get together to meet each other and to share their needs with a shared understanding that the systems that we live in currently are not going to meet our needs. And a lot of us have experienced that, especially now. The mutual aid projects are a form of political participation where people are taking responsibility for caring for each other and changing our material conditions through collective action. And the key word is collective action. It's an understanding that it is the system and not the people in the system that are suffering under the system that creates poverty, crisis, and vulnerability. And we wanted to really start with the notion of mutual aid because there are a lot of examples, and we'll talk about them later in the broadcast, about how mutual aid can allow us to navigate what is an extremely difficult situation, especially for communities that have really been vulnerable long before COVID-19. In fact, COVID-19 is really just exposing a lot of those vulnerabilities. So we wanted to give that definition of mutual aid. I'm not sure if anyone else in any of the other speakers wanted to chime in on mutual aid, just kind of give your thoughts on what it is, and then we'll talk about how it's been evidenced here in the city. Cool. All right, so we'll talk more about specific examples of mutual aid here, but I also wanted to, Renee, if you can tee up the solidarity economy movement. This is absolutely critical. So if you hear this phrase, what we talk about when we say a solidarity economy movement is we are talking about a movement to transform the dominant capitalist system into one that puts people and the planet at its core. So that is one of the fundamental principles when we say a solidarity economy. It is an evolving theoretical framework as well as a global movement comprised of practitioners, activists, organizers, scholars, and proponents. So this is definitely a broad-based movement, and it consists of things such as people's assemblies, community councils, cooperatives, social enterprises, nonprofit associations, individuals, time banks, mutual aid networks, and community land trusts. So as you can see, there are many different parts that comprise the solidarity economy. It's not just one particular thing, rather it is the aggregate of many different systems that are designed to actually put people and the planet first. So it's a different way of living and being that we are proposing in very tangible ways. So we have a few examples that we wanted to throw up in the, the 5 principles. Let's go over the 5 principles just so everyone is clear. So the 5 principles of solidarity economy are solidarity, sustainability, equity in all dimensions, that is race, gender, ability, and so on and so forth, participatory democracy, and pluralism. So those are the 5 principles of the solidarity economy. Then we have a few examples that we would throw up, just some that are actually based in Chicago. So we have the ColoNet Collaborative, to which Mike, who's on the call, will talk to all of you about in further detail. For those of you who are familiar with New Era Windows Cooperative, that was formed several years ago, it's a worker-owned cooperative, so the employees, the workers actually own the business. We have Blacks in Green, which is Naomi Davis down in Woodlawn. Equity and Transformation has been doing some really amazing work on the informal economy, Blue Tim Production, Brave Space Alliance. These are all expressions of the solidarity economy. So we wanted to make sure that we highlighted some local examples so that you know that this isn't all theoretical. This is actually very, very tangible. So the next thing that we really wanted to kind of go over with everyone and start a discussion is looking at some of these mutual aid networks and some of the things that are happening locally. We know that a lot of people in our spaces have really started to coalesce around just meeting people's immediate needs. We know that the lockdown happened quite quickly with a few days notice. And this is affecting employees, it's affecting business owners, it's affecting parents at all levels. And so what became clear and why this conversation is important is that it was necessary for us to come together immediately to meet our most pressing needs, especially at a time where we can't necessarily rely on government to step in the way that we may need them to step in. So I want to pause there and give an opportunity if there are questions or if anyone else in the panel has anything they'd like to add to that. Hearing and seeing none, we can start with highlighting some of the specific examples of mutual aid. We will, as we go over some of these examples, we'll be putting their information in the chat so that you can follow up with these resources as well on your own time. So we'll be populating that with the chat, but we wanted to give you a few concrete examples. So we'll start with equity and transformation and just kind of talking about briefly what they have been doing and sort of how they're contributing to this notion of mutual aid in this space.
I don't want to speak for equity and transformation, but I can just kind of share a few things that I know about the organization, and I'm sure those in here that are familiar with the West Side know the phenomenal work that Richard Wallace and others are doing to really create space and legitimacy for Black and brown folks that have been out of the labor market, out of the formal labor market for a set of reasons. Perhaps they were incarcerated at some point, or perhaps they're deemed as not having the correct skills. But through equity and transformation, the organization is one that's organizing community residents and really addressing needs where they are. These urgent needs where they are, trying to get resources into people's hands. A lot of what they do prior to COVID has been really trying to not just create get people employed, but actually create work in the sense that they start their own businesses. They've been talking more about starting cooperative businesses. Now that we're kind of challenged with this current crisis, they recognize that those who have been working in the informal economy are even further burdened by this. So dealing with the day-to-day needs of getting kind of food on the table, making sure that kids have the right technology so they can actually continue their education has been kind of at the forefront of what they're doing. But again, this is an organization that is in the community, of the community, for the community, and surely an excellent expression of what we talk about as the solidarity.
Awesome. So they've been doing a lot of work in the informal economy, and I wanted to actually follow up with a similar network that exists that's been doing work around the city, and that is New Era Chicago. For those who may or may not be familiar with this group, they've been doing a lot of what is mutual aid work for quite some time. Everything from providing food for people in the community. They do patrolling and monitoring, safety patrols in the community. They have mobilized people to hold local businesses accountable, especially in instances where the businesses perhaps may not have been I guess, friendly to the community or operating in the interests of the community. And so they have often stepped in to really kind of push for accountability for those businesses that inhabit many of the neighborhoods throughout the city. Most recently, I've really been impressed with the ability to mobilize swiftly, and that's what's really critical when we talk about mutual aid, is just our ability to come together quickly enough to be able to meet people's immediate needs. And so what they've been doing over the last couple of weeks, and I'll make sure to post their information, contact information in the chat box, is they have been putting together care packages specifically for seniors, for our elders, throughout the city who may not have family that are close by. In some instances, family members, in order to protect their relatives, don't want to necessarily be stopping by frequently, especially if they're working. They're still working. Many people are still essential workers. So they have been actually putting together care packages with groceries, other needed items, and delivering them throughout the city. They do have a number that you can call if there's someone who you know who needs someone to do a wellness check. So they do a wellness check on specifically to elders, but they also do it in general, but focusing on more of our elders now, just because that's an extremely vulnerable population. And they've just been mobilizing. So they're taking donations, both of goods, but also cash donations through their Cash App, and I'll make sure that everyone gets the Cash App information as well. And then using that to obtain the goods necessary. And then they have their own distribution mechanism to make sure that those elders are getting, that their people are checking in on them and that they're getting the resources that they need. So that's sort of really pulling together, especially in this critical moment that New Era Chicago is doing, is a critical form of mutual aid. And we definitely want to lift up those sorts of actions, especially now in the immediate, because we have the visioning part that we want to do, but we also know that there are immediate needs as it relates to food, products, household products, cleaning products, all sorts of things that people need now. So that's another example of mutual aid that's happening in the city. I wanted to hear more about from Camille about CF PAC and sort of what they're doing in the city as it relates to mutual aid.
Absolutely. So the Chicago Food Policy Action Council, CFPAC, has been coordinating an incredible emergency response with multiple layers to it. They have an overall forum, but then multiple sub-forums. I don't know if this will show my screen if I pull it up, but so they have the funding support for the food system. They have a section on food system workers and how to support them. Emergency food assistance for people who are experiencing food insecurity at this time. The effect on local farmers, on local producers, and local food businesses operators as well. So they have these, all of these great breakout groups. We're meeting some of these groups. We're meeting like every couple of days because we're trying to coordinate an emergency food response for the city. And so we're looking at how to coordinate with everything from Frontera and Rick Bayless's restaurant and the work that they're doing, handing out food boxes to folks there and making that available to a wider group of people, to figuring out how to make sure that local farmers and the restaurants who they typically sell to have another place to sell their produce. We're trying to make sure that there's produce sitting places while other people are dealing with food insecurity, making sure that those dots get connected and our food ecosystem stays intact during this time. So they've just taken a lead coordinating role in bringing folks together from across the food ecosystem to help each other and ourselves and other Chicagoans through this. And if you want to get involved, here's the website, and you can join the forums, and you can fill out the form on which of the 5 subgroups are really feel most relevant to your work. But yeah, it's a very active and relevant initiative that they're pulling together right now.
Awesome. Thank you for providing that information. And that is going to be posted also with CFPAC. I think we had a couple more concrete examples that we wanted to lift up. We had Brave Space Alliance that's also doing some really good work around mutual aid. I know they had pulled together a document very quickly just so that people could indicate what needs that they have. Particularly from what I've seen, they had pulled together information around just being able to provide food and other resources to folks who are in need. And so some of these mutual aid networks, I think it's important to note how you get involved with them, how you get in touch. A couple of them have been in the form of a simple Google Doc, where if you have a need, you can indicate what your need is and it goes into the Google Doc. And then on the other end of that, there are folks who are willing to meet that need, whatever it is. And so the information it's primarily done on an honor-based system, so it's not super heavily vetted, but those who are participating are either have an urgent need or are looking to help. And so we want folks to really be able to take advantage of this, not just if you have a need, but also if you are someone who has resources that you can offer or ways that you think you would like to help to be able to help meet those needs. So everything from just reaching out to some of the organizers via phone. Again, we've posted some of the contact information, so specific phone numbers you can call. We also have a number of databases that with these lists of Google Docs and other things, forms that you can fill out to have your needs meet that way as well. So those are just a few of the things that we have been really trying to lift up in this immediate time. And if you are tuning in, feel free to add other local mutual aid organizers that you have connected with or resources that you have connected with, because we want to be able to share that information as well. I think this is a good time to switch over to, I think it's Renee. We're going to talk about some of the things that we did just a brief overview, but things that we may need to do more of, things that we could do better, or things we can lift up, and some responses from those who are on the call also, if you have feedback in that regard.
I think first, if we could hear from Mike about time banking and Cola-Nut and some of the work that he's been doing in the community around how do we help people get their needs met in different ways where we don't necessarily have to use money.
Certainly. So picking up with just a bit of a longer introduction on the history of the Cola-Nut Collaborative. The Cola-Nut Collaborative launched in 2017 in partnership or out of the Healthy Food Hub and Black Oak Center for Sustainable Renewable Living. If there are folks on the line who are familiar with Baba Fred Carter and Dr. Jafunza Wright Carter, our last location in the city was in South Shore, and there were some plans to go back into Garfield Park that were stalled by these current circumstances. But the origination of the idea for building the time bank out of the Healthy Food Hub was that we had been doing food distribution in South Shore, in Greater Grand, in Avalon Park, Grand Crossing, and Inglewood for about 10 years for the Healthy Food Hub. But the challenge was, the problem we were trying to address was connecting the farmers on the end of the pipeline in Pembroke Township near Kankakee, historically Black farming community, with food challenge or food access challenge communities in South and West Sides. So we were very concerned about just this challenge that we are facing right now, this supply chain conversation, which is, how do you get local hands on the production, the aggregation, and the distribution of the food, so that we know where food is being sourced from, and we know how to meet our food needs within a regional sort of 500-mile ecosystem. Now, doing production, aggregation, and distribution is a whole lot of work, right? It's a lot of logistics. So to be able to offload at least the distribution would have been a bit easier in terms of our ability to open up more hubs, because we could not divide the people we had in South Shore to do hubs on the West Side and things like that. So the time bank was one way that we were testing to incentivize people to participate in projects that had definitely a very rich and deep community value, but perhaps they didn't, make up a lot of financial value for those who are in the food space. Selling groceries is not a food boon. It's not a financial boon, right? But it's definitely a place where community happens. It's definitely a place that it's a space of tremendous community need. And so to be able to develop more of these hubs was the impetus for launching the time bank. Now, once we attempted to work that out inside of the Healthy Food Hub, there were other applications that we saw throughout the city in terms of the possibilities for communities to do asset mapping. So within the Time Bank, what people do is they post things that they're looking to request, things that they need, but then they post things that they're offering. And in terms of the exchange that happens inside of a Time Bank, basically people are able to trade their time as if it were a type of currency. So I do a lot of fermentation. I also do household budgeting. In fact, you know, what I have here today, I've actually got this jar of tepache, which is pineapple cider, and I'm about to trade it with a friend in the neighborhood for some face masks. She's knitted some face masks on the cloth. So it's that sort of rich non-monetary relationships that we're attempting to build it through time banking.
I feel like alcohol and face masks, that's what everybody needs right now. So you really, you all are doing it just right.
Yes, we did see in the news reports that the alcohol sales have spiked. But you know, this is it's a smidgen. Like this is a little low proof, right? That's not the really hard cider that my grandmother used to make. But you know, I mean, ultimately, that's what it's about, right? So not only are we actually engineering a transaction of resources, you know, pineapple cider for a face mask, but we're also cultivating and deepening our relationships with each other, right? And we're also learning about one another's skills. So there might be a need at some point that, you know, this person is going to overproduce in their garden, and they're going to need to know something about how to ferment or how to can or how to store that produce. And I might have that skill, I might have that resource that they can use to facilitate that, right? And then, you know, maybe in exchange for me helping them can, you know, we do some splits of it, you know, of the canned goods, right? So I mean, this is the sort of thing that we do inside of the Time Bank. It's part asset mapping, right? So it's part just learning about the networks and the skill sets that exist in your community. But then there's also that incentive mechanism. How do we keep people engaged in community projects that get hard, that take a lot of energy, that often wipe people out? And you know, and unfortunately, because we don't have ways to incentivize new people to participate, it wipes the same people out, the exact same people at the meetings all the time, that end up getting burned out and the project falls apart. You know, so that's the challenge that the Time Bank is trying to address. Ultimately, through this, again, non-monetary exchange, something other than money, because, you know, where there's not enough money, there's often rich cultural capital, there's often rich intellectual capital, rich experiential capital. And so we're trying to take advantage and leverage some of those other forms of capital that exist inside of our communities and engage those. And that way we can say, okay, this community might be financially under-resourced, but there's a tremendous amount of other resources that we have available and accessible to us in this arena.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I think one of the reasons why time banking is so important right now is, right, simply because of the fact of the COVID-19 public health crisis, people do not have access to cash, right? People do not necessarily, we know that a lot of people have been laid off. We know that, you know, unemployment is going to be extremely high. We know that people can no longer access the ways in which they were sustaining themselves and their families. And so what we need to think about, and we also know that the governmental response is not going to be sufficient and not necessarily center the people who are, you know, who are most oppressed, who are on the margins of the economy, who might be in the informal economy. We know that there are certain people who will not be able to receive any benefits from any of the federal programs or local programs. And so we need to really try to support and continue to build our institutions that we control to really ensure that people can get what they need, right? Mutual aid is a way of doing that. Time banking is a way of doing that, trying to figure out ways in which people can meet their material needs without having to actually access or have access to financial cash wealth on hand, because we know that this moment is really calling for all of us to respond in new ways, right? To make sure that we're taking care of each other to get through this. And so I really so much appreciate the work that you're doing at the Cola Time Banking, Mike, and I really think that this is a moment in time where people should dig into that, because the crisis has unveiled all the ways in which our economy fails us, right? all the way in which it fails the communities that we care about. And so I think time banking is one way to address that, and making sure and giving people a way in which to take care of each other and also get what they need. So love that example. And just going along with that, I know one of the things that the time bank does quite a bit is this offers in needs market. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what is that? What does that typically look like? Mike?
Certainly. So, you know, as I mentioned, the Time Bank launches in 2017, and it's an experiment, right? You know, and as with experiments, there are experimental failures. So, you know, the first attempt at kind of engaging the time banking community, I made the mistake of being, you know, erudite and scientific and academic and saying, I'm going to go on a speaking tour or a speaking circuit, right? I'm gonna go give a bunch of lectures on time banking and then see if that engages the community. It did not engage the community. And I'll relate it to you because the time bank actually grows out of this permaculture course that Black Oaks held. And we were facilitating, and permaculture is a form of sustainable agriculture that thinks about design in line with nature's own cycles, right? So I was facilitating what might be called social permaculture, or how do the relationships in society develop between people? How do people become engaged with one another? How do people become, you know, intimate and connected to one another? So when I went back to the permaculture, you know, students, and I talked about my initial attempts to seed permaculture in the ground of community, I said, look, you know, I went out there with a handful of seed, and I figured that if I just scattered the seed to the wind, it was just going to take root and things were going to flourish. And, you know, and a bird came and got it, and the wind blew some away, and, you know, just, I mean, you know, whatever. But effectively, it was, the metaphor is this, you know, things to build sort of organic, to organize things organically is to go into communities and be in conversation and to help people build conversations with one another. And the offers and needs market is a form of that. It's essentially getting people in a room, ideally people who are already in relationship with one another. So, you know, in some of these mutual aid spaces, we've had this idea of pod mapping that has developed, which is that there are people that you're already kind of intimate with, kind of in relationship with, kind of in forms of community with, deep in that right now, and be in conversation with them about that. And so in the offers and needs market, we do a pitch. You know, it's a simple pitch, and you can kind of do this with different size groups. And the offers pitch is, my name's Mike Strode. I am able to do fermentation. I know how to do kefir, kombucha, pickling, and various other forms. I'm willing to offer fermentation on a scheduled basis for 2 hours of time credit, or in the time bank, we call them COLA. So that's an offers pitch. And, you know, if you have a big group, you'll go around and you'll just make sure that everybody just does the offers pitch, right? You don't get into like the back and forth conversation yet, just give the offers pitch. And people will have pen and paper so they can write these things down and follow up with one another. And then you'll follow that afterwards with the needs round, which is, my name's Mike Strode, and I have so many dress socks that I have worn holes in, but I really like them, and I don't know a thing about mending socks. So can you help me with that? I need a seamstress, or I need, you know, mending assistance, instruction. And I'm willing to exchange 4 time credits, you know, for your assistance with this project. It's in, you know, you'll give it, with the needs, you'll give an urgency. Like, is it urgent? Is it not urgent? You know, is it semi-urgent? So that's not an urgent need. And, you know, that you'll do that needs round. And what happens in that space is that because you're kicking off with the offers, people recognize themselves as assets and as having gifts in that process. So then when you get to the needs round, they don't feel as vulnerable, right? You've already been a little bit transparent with folks. You've already connected with folks who need the skills that you have. And then the needs round doesn't feel so, you know, again, vulnerable for you. So that's the offers and needs market. And it's really a practice. It's a practice of time banking, a practical time banking, because you can build a database with these spreadsheets. You know, I have a sort of comprehensive website where you can post things, but the ultimate practice is really, how do communities get into conversation with one another on a regular basis about what skills are in their network and what skills have newly shown up to their network? What are the new things people have learned? What are the new practices people have acquired? Who's new on the block? whatever it looks like. And so that's sort of the offers and needs market. And then after that, you might do some reflection, just to kind of make sure that people are rooted in what's happening. And that's that asset mapping process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so one of the things that we wanted to spend some time talking about is really trying to understand exactly what are the immediate needs right now. We know, obviously, people need food. They don't necessarily have a check coming in. They need a rent freeze, right? We know that there's a freeze on mortgages right now, and you can't be evicted. And so a number of people by building, by neighborhood are organizing rent freezes. We know that people are having a hard time paying their rent. But also that people need direct financial assistance and to pay and cover the things that they need to pay for to be able to survive and sustain their families, right? And obviously, finally, we also know that with any COVID response, we know that the fallout of all of this is going to disproportionately impact Black and Latinx folks. We've already seen it in terms of, the people that we've lost. In terms of the health outcomes for people who actually contract the COVID virus. And so it's really important for us to start thinking about what are the things that we as communities, as people who are in institutions, who are in organizations, in small businesses, how do we support each other in this moment? But what are our priorities and what are the real needs? So we just wanted to open it up for the folks on the webinar, just to try to get a sense of what do you see as the priorities, right? Is it perhaps access to food? And there are a number of mutual aid organizations right now who are taking people care packages or, weeks worth of pantry items that they can use, obviously to eat and to feed them families? Or is it more need around direct financial assistance? And that's a lot of the conversation that we've been having is how do we start to redistribute income, money, right, to really address the urgency of what people are experiencing right now, and also to support those organizations that are providing that direct kind of relief? Or is it that we need to put more energy into rent strikes and making sure that people are protected and can stay in their homes? Or obviously, the access to healthcare issues. So I'm going to launch a poll now for the people who are participating in the webinar. If you could take a minute and respond. And then we can have a conversation after that in terms of how do we start to think about the priorities, how do we start to think about action, as well as the long-term strategy of really changing our economy to make sure that people can survive, that they can thrive, that our communities will come out the other side of this in a better position and also in a more secure position to be able to live our lives, right? And so I'm launching the poll now. Again, if you could, we'll take probably about 30 seconds or so people have a chance to respond. You'll see that the first question is, in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, what do you see as the biggest needs in your neighborhood or community right now? So what are you hearing from your folks? Is it the fact that there's not enough food going around? Or is it more issues around direct financial assistance or rent or access to healthcare, or something else entirely different, right? Obviously, people have been experiencing all kinds of challenges. And, what do you see as some of the gaps right now in terms of what's on the ground or what is currently in place in terms of resources?
And while people are responding to the poll, there were just a couple of things that I wanted to lift up in this part of the conversation, especially around why the solidarity economy is so crucial. And it's because we have seen a lot of the things that have been exposed through COVID-19 with many of the things that the solidarity economy seeks to address. So there are a few things that I wanted to lift up. One is obviously a lot of people have been laid off, who've lost their jobs, some with very little warning. I know one of the airlines almost immediately laid off all their employees before we even started having conversations about timelines and things of that nature. The other thing that we've seen a lot of is conversations around paid sick leave and whether or not employees should get paid sick leave. Well, now, in light of COVID-19, it seems like common sense that paid sick leave should be a given, that it's not a luxury for a few, but it should actually be a given. The other things have been around pay. A lot of employees are, unfortunately, people are unemployed, but also what the wages are prior to. So we've had things like the Fight for 15, just trying to get a $15 an hour minimum wage. And ironically, those same workers that may have faced resistance to calls for $15 an hour minimum wage are now largely classified as essential workers. These are the folks who are the sanitation workers, the fast food workers, the restaurant workers, folks who are still out working, making sure that some things are still happening even on lockdown. We haven't even talked about the gig economy and how the gig economy largely inflated, at least in my view, the employment rate. And yet these are some of the most vulnerable workers in our economy. And so when we talk about things like worker-owned cooperatives, for example, it really gets to many of those things that we have seen come front and center. So the ability to democratize the workforce, where the workers actually can determine paid sick leave, the number of holidays that you get, the conditions of work, where workers can determine salaries. A lot of the things that we have seen happen with traditional businesses, we seek to address through worker-owned cooperatives, for example, because it gets to the heart of the dignity of work and making sure that people are not vulnerable because they're working for a particular company that doesn't have values where they actually care about the people that work for them. And so it's important for this conversation and other conversations moving forward, we're wanting to really shine light on why the mechanisms in the solidarity economy are so crucial to this moment, because they actually address many of the things that have been illuminated through COVID-19, specifically around the economy, around the conditions of work, and around protecting our workers.
Yeah, and it looks like pretty much everybody has completed the poll. It looks like 63% of folks said that people really need direct financial assistance to cover necessities. And next kind of being rent relief, access to healthcare, and then access to food and food insecurity issues. And then what I've also found really interesting is like, and I think that we've been seeing this as well, and just in terms of the folks that we're in community with, right? And what we've been talking about is that the biggest things is that we need to be able to move money to folks who need it right now to be able to pay for the things that they need, right? That is one of the things, at least in the city of Chicago, that seems to be missing, just people being able to access cash very quickly. And I'm particularly sensitive to this in terms of both people who will not receive any kind of relief check from the federal government, obviously, that those are people who do not have, a social security number, who may or may not have documentation here in the city of Chicago, Illinois, the United States, obviously, people who might not necessarily have access to relief through any of the small business programs, and certainly like trying to think about ways in which people have access more so just to grants than to loans that then are going to obviously follow them or come with certain restrictions in terms of how they actually can help their business survive. And really those businesses that are connected and based in community that people rely on, organizations that are doing really good work that got their funding pooled. And so those are a lot of the concerns I know that are front and center in my mind. The other biggest gap that I think people are seeing, which is I think another conversation that we've already had, is about this idea, ways in which just to share resources, making it easier for us who perhaps have things to offer, right, or have logistical support to get things to people that need it, right, and making sure that people understand like what's available. Like that has been really difficult. I think people are doing a really good job of trying to document and come up with comprehensive lists. It's changing. There are deadlines in terms of accessing certain things. There are some obviously ties in terms of programs that are coming through. But we know that we need, I think, just better coordination. And that's one of the things that we've been talking about. Like how do we, as folks who are really trying to support community, trying to support communities that have been oppressed, that have been left behind, how do we provide better support to make sure that they can get what they need? And so I know that that's certainly like strikes a chord with me and resonates for me in terms of what I think some of the immediate needs are. I would just ask, if others have anything to add just in terms of what we see as the outstanding needs, how this crisis has unveiled, I think, the failures of so many systems, and what we, as folks who are committed to building communities, committed to taking care of each other, committed to mutual aid and solidarity economy, right, really focusing on the needs of people, what we see as some potential solutions to that. And so if folks want to chime in or any comments through the chat box would be appreciated.
Yeah, I think Larissa has a point that was somewhat addressed by EAT's work, Equity and Transformation, but she knows that something, one thing.
Hey, Stacy, your audio is cutting in and out a little bit. If you could get your mic a little bit closer, it would be great.
Yeah, I don't know. Is that better? So I'll just read this and see if it's, hopefully it doesn't cut out. She suggested something to think about are the folks that will not receive relief checks, right? They're working in the underground or informal economy, or hard to employ people who've been out of the labor market for years because of a lack of work or returning citizens. So there, much of the conversation has been around, at least both the national conversation and even the city level conversation has been around these checks, and people are waiting for some type of resource. But we know that disproportionately, the folks that will either not get any check, any support, or folks that will not get enough support will be the Black and Latinx folks in this city and every city. So what do we have in place, or what can we create to support our communities? And that's a lot of the motivation and the rationale for coming together today. And really trying to engage folks around both what your needs are, but also looking forward, right? So there are two different types of needs. There's the immediacy of now, right? There's a set of things that we need now, and I think Renee was trying to address with the poll. Do we need food? Do we need money? Do we need to be able to pay rent? Those are things that we need right now. But then thinking kind of medium term, and medium term with COVID-19 is 3 weeks from now, right? When some of these deadlines have passed, and we're kind of another reality is before us. Like, what might that look like for us? And who will step in to kind of address some of those needs? How are we going to take care of ourselves and each other? But then even going beyond that, people are hoping, to get back outside, to re-engage in kind of social interactions that are not on Zoom. But there's also going to be a lot of trepidation, a lot of fear, because people just don't really know what the virus has, if it will kind of reemerge and how. So we don't know how long this will be our reality. But what we do know, those of us that have been working in the solidarity economy, that when we come out on the other side, we have to make it better than it was before. This notion of going back to the way it was doesn't work for us. I can speak for myself. It doesn't work for me because the way we were was, a society that was rooted in inequality and racism. And that just, why go back there? So the whole notion of the solidarity economy is to say, there are other alternative models out there, or other models out there. The fact that we've only been trained in one, and that's kind of the capitalism, American capitalism 101, is a problem. And if we were really trained in how to think democratically and how to participate fully and how to think collectively, if that was a part of our fabric, it would be much easier to kind of organize. So at this juncture, we're both trying to organize, and we are recognizing that this is a moment in which people are struggling, right? And so you're organizing under struggle. We had a lot of ideas in terms of moving forward, in terms of how can we create a fund that would help people with their immediate needs, think about what this crisis is going to look like when you think about it. Right now we're feeling it, how it's affecting our families and our bodies, but what will it look like in our communities? When we go outside, what will our corridors look like if all of the business is closed? or many of the
Hey,
businesses.
Stacy, do you want to talk a little bit about what Boston is doing on that fund idea and how we might translate that here?
Yeah, I mean, I wish we could. Yeah, so I have this. So there is a fund in Boston that comes out of the Center for Economic Democracy, and so they have a long history of supporting worker-owned cooperatives and economic democracy, and also the thinking behind that, right? So some of this is about thinking, some of it is about political action, a lot of it is pushing our elected officials to change policy and regulations so that it creates an environment so we can do the work we need to do. But even if they don't, right, we still have to organize and do the work that we need to do. So off the top of my head, remember what's the name of the fund? The Mass Redistribution Fund. So it's a Massachusetts Redistribution Fund. And essentially what it's doing is it's creating a platform for people that have more resources, people that might receive these checks from the government but may not need all of it. They can contribute the check to the fund. People that just want to make a donation. People that, if you just feel this is an important endeavor, you can put money in a fund. And this reputable organization is holding that, but it's a grassroots organization. It's not one of these large NGOs or government organizations. It's a grassroots organization that is not just holding it, but it has already created a network of other grassroots organizations that are doing really important work in respective communities in the Boston, the broader Boston area. And if you go on the website, you see these are all Black and Brown organizations. And the intention is to funnel resources from the people to the people, right? From the people to the people. And that's a really powerful idea. The idea that we are what we need and we can take care of ourselves and we don't have to just wait around for some check to not come. They have organized it such that they can match need and resource. It won't be perfect, but I think that's what we need to think about for us in Chicago. So this was the first conversation to just kind of bring people together so we can just put some of the language out there and talk about things that are already happening in Chicago. Chicago has some real dope, I'm not going to use the expletive, I usually say dope-esque, but dope stuff happening, right? And we don't always know about it, right? The stuff that Mike has been doing with Cola Collaborative broadly, and time banking is one component of it, it's brilliant work, right? The cooperative work that Amara has been doing, that Camille has been doing, that Renee, if you're in the cooperative community, I don't think there's a cooperative in Chicago that doesn't work with Renee, right? Like everyone is kind of, so people, there are a number of people that are really trying to do things, and we need a way of bringing the resources from the people to the people. And so this conversation was to just begin that, and to also, the reason I'm being a little hesitant in terms of talking about, we hope to create a fund, but we don't know how that's going to work. So I don't want to put it out there that, we're going to have all this money to give away, because we don't have a lot of money in pocket at the moment, but we do have a model. And the idea that there is the Mass Redistribution Fund, that's out there, that is a model that I think is worth aspiring to. And so I invite you to kind of click on the link. It's in the chat. So you can see
Stacey,
what
I also wanted to just underscore to Larissa's point that something like the Mass Redistribution Fund could be used to actually funnel those kind of financial resources to organizations that work specifically with that population. So if it was an organization like Equity and Transformation, or some of the local organizations that work with our returning citizens who know very well that their members or the people that they serve won't necessarily be getting a check from the government anytime soon. And so they may have to be that entity that can provide the direct cash assistance. So this notion of sort of redistributing funds, even with those who may feel that they can do without the whatever amount they receive from the government, and being able to put that money in a fund that's going to those who are higher need, or who have just more pressing immediate needs. That's what that kind of fund could do. And so the good news for us is that we do have a blueprint for sort of walking down that road to be able to do that. And I think that's the sort of thing that can reach those who aren't necessarily plugged in to the government, or if you didn't file your taxes for a couple of years, or any of the myriad reasons why you may not see a check for at all, or for at least a number of weeks. So.
Yeah, and I think we have to be honest about the fact that the kind of assistance, right, the $1,200 that people are going to receive is not nearly enough to actually sustain people for however long they're going to be out of work, right? And also the conditions that they're going to be facing in the meantime. I think that, you know, obviously, I think it's important for us to think about redistributing like cash, and that's, I think, part of one of the things that we're trying to figure out, like, how do we create a mechanism to do that, like in a very quick way to address urgent needs, but also more broadly, right, that we know that there's a problem with the redistribution of wealth in this country, and like there's a larger structural problem, but we know we have to deal with the immediate problem, and there's always this tension. And so I just want to underscore, certainly, like people who are in the informal economy, which we know tend to be Black and Latinx folks more so than anyone else. We know that service workers, restaurant workers, the majority of which are Black and Latinx in the city of Chicago. We know that those are the communities that are getting hit hardest by this public health crisis. And so we, like, basically, we have to mobilize, right, and think about ways in which we can continue. And people are already doing this work, and that's what we're trying to lift up, but also trying to figure out how do we scale this up. And also, how do we think about the long-term strategy, right, to really transform what this economy looks like, because it's going to continue to fail us. These systems will continue to fail us. They fail us every day, even before this crisis hit us. I think it's only made it more clear how bad the situation is.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one thing that struck me in looking at the mass redistribution fund and looking at the organizations, I mean, we use the term grassroots, but often we even think of the not-for-profit industrial complex, these not-for-profits that are very well known, and they tend to get a lot of the resources. But when you look at the organizations that they're interested in connecting and servicing, it's many of the grassroots organizations that are doing the hard work for and with the people that are most marginalized by the system, right? So to give money to a large not-for-profit, it still doesn't trickle down. It may not be a for-profit, but it's still not trickling down for the community that needs it. So again, this is a model that we hope to emulate here in Chicago, because we recognize that just saying that we're supporting not-for-profits is not enough. We have to support our community organizations. We have to support our community small businesses. And we have to use time banking. It won't always be financial support, but the myriad ways in which we need to do that support and organize the support. I think the biggest challenge we have right now is organizing it. Disparate things are happening, and so how do we organize it that in a way that meets the immediate needs and sustainable for a longer term?
So we'll be organizing a series of these meetings moving forward, these webinars moving forward, and hopefully some structures that can meet the short or policy initiatives or other things that meet these short and long-term, short needs and long-term vision that we have in the next, over the next few weeks. So we're kind of, responding as we go, and we'd love to hear from everybody about what your ideas on how to do this best. This really would need to be a collective effort and source everyone's ideas. So we'll be reaching out in a lot of different ways and setting the stage for these conversations to continue over the next couple months. Any other speakers you want to close out?
I wanted to bring in, before we do, Peace's comment, Peace's just thinking out loud. What about creating redistribution circles of a certain amount of people? These circles will be committed to getting and sharing resources. To me, off top sounds like a SUSU type model, where, in other cultures, and I know this is represented in various cultures around the world, but a model where you have a certain group of people together, they pool their funds, and it sort of goes down the line who gets the funds at the end of the day, and then they're able to use it for whatever their need is, and then they put their money back into the fund. So it's a very trust-based system. I don't know if you guys are all familiar with the susu. There are other names for the same concept in different cultures.
Like lending circles here is how some of the folks refer to them.
What are they called?
Just lending circles.
Oh,
here
lending.
we
Okay, I guess that's
yeah.
the English way. The lending circle. But yeah, that's also, I think, something that, you know, we've tandas. Yes, I heard tandas. I think is that a Mexican culture, I believe. Yes, awesome. So yeah, tanda, susu, lending circle, those are actually part of, when we talk about the solidarity economy, it's important to note that a lot of the concepts are not new. We didn't just come up with them. A lot of them are actually pulled from indigenous cultures, societies that are much more communal, societies that actually are based on collectivism versus individualism. Any capitalist society like the United States is based on individualism. And so you'll see so much is when we have to pull together, because the principles that undergird this country are often based on the individual and rugged individualism. A lot of what comes through in the solidarity economy is actually based on the notion of a collective. It's based on the notion of being in communication with each other, being in togetherness with your community, and therefore our decisions are supposed to be in the interest of the good of the collective versus what I can get and hoard and keep to myself versus all others. And so just the fact that things like susu, tanda, lending circle, those are part of when we talk about solidarity economy, and they are rooted in, they are culturally rooted, especially in indigenous cultures where many of these practices had originated.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight, you know, I did an interview with Yavid Holtz of Cowrie Village in the Bay Area, and I posted a link in the chat there of the Rutical Gathering, and then certainly, you know, this practice of bringing money together and developing the money pools and being able to distribute that, ancient practices, right, that communities have brought with them from their points of origin. But there are also definitely ways to use them alongside, you know, some of these pod mapping practices that we're talking about now. One of the things that Dr. Hussein in Toronto, Caroline Travas Hussein, absolutely, talks about is, you know, just the level of trust that has to happen, and something that Yavid talked also about with the Rutical Gathering is the level of trust that has to happen to be able to get to that space of pooling the money, right? Because we attach other things, other layers to money, but the depth of relationships that happens there and the other things that we can do inside of that space, you know, are tremendous. And I would just highlight with Co-op for Lib, we came together initially just, you know, to study Cooperation for Liberation Study and Working Group, another initiative that I've mentioned being engaged in. We came together to study Dr. Jessica Gordon-Nimbard's Collective Courage. And out of that space, we've built other layers up to our relationship, you know, that caused us to, before this crisis occurred, we've got like a core team that has a WhatsApp group, and, you know, we trade resources through that WhatsApp group. We're looking out for who needs distilled water. We're looking out for who needs, you know, that additional bag of flour, right? So these are the types of things that can happen if you had something like a susu that also becomes another type of resource exchange and trading community, and you can develop other layers of support there. So that's a really important, you know, concept to think about in terms of, you know, these smaller pods. And for me, when I think about scale, I think about replication. How can we develop, you know, small, nimble, you know, connections amongst groups of people that are replicated amongst other groups of people who can then be in communication with each other and strengthen the intersections.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Mike. That's just crucial information. Does anyone else have any last final comments as we sort of wind down, just on the information shared, on next steps and then I'll be able to close it out. Awesome. And comment, I'm looking in the chat box to make sure we didn't leave out any questions. So again, I want to thank all of you, all of our lovely panel, I guess, for this discussion. Also to remind everyone that the information that we shared about the solidarity economy and mutual aid networks, we did include links and contact information in the chat box. So please refer to that, even as just a starting point to begin to reach out to some of these organizations if you are interested in either supporting a mutual aid network, launching a mutual aid network, or if you have something to offer, or if you have a particular need. Please, please, please take advantage of the resources that are there. Again, this is designed to be just the beginning of a conversation about what the solidarity economy means and why it's timely, especially dealing with COVID-19 and everything that's been exposed about the deficiencies and flaws of the current system that we live in, namely this capitalist, sort of individualistic system. We're seeing how much it's necessary for us to really come together, and not just in the time of emergency, which we're really trying to do to meet people's immediate needs, but also to begin to vision what the economy could look like and the systems that we can actually build. And so we're doing that by lifting up some of the real life examples that are here, right here in Chicago and elsewhere around the country. But we're also doing that by hoping to educate people on some of the terms that we use, the phrases, so that you can become much more familiar with what a solidarity economy looks like and join us in this work. This is community work, this is communal work, and it's the building that we can't do on our own. And so this is a first in a string of conversations that we're hoping to have. In later conversations, we'll also be talking more about the Mass Redistribution Fund, which we discussed the model in Boston. We're looking to see what pieces of these models we can replicate here. So we'll be giving more specific information around that, as well as other tangible steps that we're going to be working toward to create the infrastructure to support not only folks in the community with their immediate needs, but also these systems that it is that we're trying to build. So I encourage you, if you haven't, we're on Facebook, Solidarity Chicago. So this session, you can actually share it even after it's over. So please do share it in your networks as much as possible. Join the Solidarity Chicago page. And then if you have an opportunity, we will be sending out information on when the next conversation will take place. We will have more tangible, specific information, just like we provided today. And hopefully we'll have even more people tuning in to join us. So with that, I want to again say thank you to everyone for joining us, and until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.
All right, thank you all.
All right, thanks for coming.